Can you pretend to be my husband tonight?" The widow's plea that changed everything. The mansion stood like a beacon of wealth and mystery at the edge of Toria's small frontier town. Its towering walls, dark windows, and ornate iron gates seemed to belong to another world, one far beyond the rough and dusty roads Jake knew so well. As he walked with Eleanor through the grand entrance, the cold marble floor beneath his boots felt alien. The sound of his spurs was swallowed by the vastness of the hallway as they moved deeper into the mansion. Eleanor glanced at him, her face still serene but her eyes betraying a hint of unease. "Just remember," she said softly, "play your part, and everything will be fine." Jake nodded, his jaw tightening. He had never been good at pretending, especially not in situations like this. But something about her request, the way she asked, stirred a curiosity deep within him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he wanted to help her. Still, a part of him felt unsettled, as though there were things she wasn't saying. The sound of laughter and music reached them as they entered the grand ballroom. It was like stepping into another world, one of elegance, of rich people with polished shoes and glimmering jewels. Men and women in flowing dresses and sharp suits circled the room, their conversations lively, but their glances occasionally darting towards Jake. He felt out of place, like a wolf among sheep. "Just follow my lead," Eleanor whispered as they approached a group of well-dressed men and women. The tightness in her voice made Jake wonder if she was just as nervous as he was. The guests fell into silence when they saw the widow and her husband enter, as if some unspoken rule dictated that attention must be given to them. Eleanor was all grace, a woman used to the eyes of others, while Jake stood beside her like a man pulled out of time and place, a cowboy in a world of glistening, glittering strangers. He couldn't help but feel like a showpiece, someone on display trying to fit into a world where he didn't belong. "Eleanor, darling, you look stunning as always," a man in a dark velvet suit said with a wide smile. His words were smooth, but his eyes held something else, an unreadable emotion. Eleanor smiled back, but Jake saw a flicker of something in her expression. Was it discomfort? Or perhaps something more? "Thank you, Lucius," she replied coolly, her hand resting lightly on Jake's arm. "And this is my husband, Jake." Jake gave a stiff nod, offering a polite but distant smile. He didn't trust these people. They all seemed too perfect, too polished, with their eyes too sharp. "Your husband?" Lucius raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting from Eleanor to Jake. "Interesting. I didn't know you'd remarried." Eleanor's smile didn't falter. "A recent decision," she said, her voice smooth like silk. "Jake and I have been reunited." The word reunited lingered in the air like an unanswered question, but the crowd quickly moved on to other topics. It was clear they had all heard rumors about Eleanor's husband's untimely death and the strange circumstances surrounding it, but no one dared to ask. Not here, not in front of Jake. As the evening wore on, Jake's unease grew. Every laugh, every word, every gesture from the guests felt like part of some elaborate performance. People exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking, and it wasn't long before Jake realized they weren't simply gossiping about the widow's past. They were watching him. He found himself standing by the window, trying to blend into the shadows, when a soft voice called his name. "Jake." It was Eleanor, moving towards him with an elegance that made her seem like she belonged to another world entirely. She wore a delicate necklace that sparkled under the chandeliers, and her dress flowed around her like water. "What is it?" Jake asked, his voice low. He didn't want to draw attention to their conversation, especially not with all these eyes on them. Eleanor paused, looking over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "You need to be careful. They're not just here for the ball. Some of these people are looking for something." Jake frowned, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps approached. A man in his late 40s, with graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes, entered the room. His presence seemed to freeze the air around him, and everyone, except Jake, bowed their heads as he walked by. "Ah, Lucius," Eleanor said, her tone colder now. "I didn't expect you here tonight." Lucius smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "How could I miss your ball, Eleanor?" he said, his gaze flickering to Jake. "And who's this? Your husband, I presume?" Jake's jaw clenched at the man's tone. He could feel the tension in the air, but he wasn't sure what to do with it. He wasn't used to these kinds of games. "I've told you already, Lucius," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. "Jake is my husband. Please respect that." Lucius's smile remained, though there was something colder in his eyes now. "Of course. I wouldn't dream of crossing such a fine gentleman." Jake didn't believe him for a second. The man was sizing him up, just like the others in the room, but Jake wasn't the kind to back down from a challenge. He stood tall, making sure to lock eyes with Lucius. As the evening wore on, Jake found himself more and more aware of the strange tension between him and Eleanor's guests. They were all playing a role, smiling, laughing, chatting, but Jake knew something was off. He just didn't know what it was yet. Eventually, Eleanor led him away from the crowd, deeper into the mansion. She didn't say a word, but the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a simple party. Something bigger was happening here, something dangerous. As they reached a small study near the back of the house, Eleanor closed the door behind them, her face pale. "They're watching us, Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And I think they know something about you. About us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" I think my late husband wasn't just a businessman," she said, taking a shaky breath. "I think he was involved in something illegal. Something powerful. And now they want it, whatever it is he left behind." Jake's heart raced. He had no idea what he had walked into, but it was clear now. This wasn't just about pretending to be her husband for a night. It was about survival. And whatever Eleanor's late husband had been involved in, Jake was now tangled up in it too. He stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on her arm. "We'll get through this," he said, though his words felt hollow. He wasn't sure how they'd make it out of this mess alive, but he knew one thing for sure. Things had just become a lot more complicated. The following morning, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting long shadows across the cold marble floors. Jake woke up to the sound of the wind whistling outside. The night before had been a blur of too many smiles, too many stares, and too many unspoken words. His head ached, and not just from the drink he had taken. It was the kind of headache that came from uncertainty, the feeling that something dangerous was always just out of sight. Eleanor was already up, sitting at a table near the window, her back to him. She seemed deep in thought, but her sharp movements showed that she was tense, waiting for something. Jake wasn't sure what exactly she was waiting for, but he knew it was important. Her entire demeanor had changed since the ball. The calm, collected widow he had first met seemed to be unraveling little by little. "Morning," Jake said, his voice rough from sleep. Eleanor turned, giving him a small but strained smile. "Morning." "I don't think I've ever seen you so quiet," Jake remarked, stretching his arms. He was no stranger to silence, but something about Eleanor's quietness felt off. She hesitated before answering, her fingers tracing the edge of the cup in front of her. "There are things I haven't told you, Jake. Things you need to know if we're going to survive this." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" She looked away for a moment, clearly weighing her words. "Last night, those people, they weren't just socializing. They were all here for one reason. To find something. Something my late husband had hidden away." Jake leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Hidden away? What kind of something?" Eleanor's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. "I don't know everything, but my husband, his name was Samuel. He was involved in more than just trade. He got mixed up with people from the fringes of the galaxy, smugglers, outlaws, and worse. He had information, something dangerous, and I think he hid it here, in this house." Jake stood up, the floor creaking beneath his boots. "And you think they're here for it?" Eleanor nodded. "I'm sure of it. Lucius, the man you met last night, is just a pawn. The real power is in the hands of someone else, someone much more dangerous." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He had a feeling this wasn't going to be as simple as playing the part of her husband for a night. This was no longer about pretending. It was about survival, and Jake wasn't sure what kind of danger he was stepping into. "We need to find out what Samuel hid," Eleanor continued, her voice low. "And we need to do it fast. 'Cause if we don't, they'll find it before we do." Jake thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll do this together. But we need to be careful. I've dealt with enough bad people to know that they don't stop until they get what they want." Eleanor stood, her face set with resolve. "I know. But I can't do this alone. You're the only one I can trust right now." Jake didn't know whether it was her words or the way she said them, but something in him shifted. He had always lived a solitary life, one built on quick decisions and even quicker exits. But standing there in front of Eleanor, with her past and her secrets laid bare, he felt a strange pull. For the first time in a long while, he didn't want to walk away. They spent the rest of the morning going through the mansion. Each room seemed colder than the last, filled with expensive furniture but an eerie emptiness, as though the walls themselves were hiding something. Eleanor led Jake to her late husband's study, a room that smelled of old books and dust. Jake took a deep breath. "This is where it'll be, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded. "It's the last place anyone would think to look, but I have a feeling Samuel left a clue somewhere in here." She started pulling books off the shelves, one by one. The shelves creaked under the weight of the old leather-bound volumes, but none of them seemed to hold anything of value. Jake moved to the desk, running his hands over the surface, checking for anything unusual. His fingers brushed against a small hidden compartment beneath the desk drawer. "Well, well," Jake muttered under his breath as he opened it. Inside there were papers, old yellowed documents. He quickly scanned through them, but they didn't make much sense at first. There were coordinates, names, and references to something called the Blackstone Protocol. Eleanor stepped over, peering at the papers in Jake's hands. Her face paled as she read. "This is it. This is what they're looking for." Jake looked at her, confused. What does it mean?" Eleanor's voice trembled as she spoke. The Blackstone Protocol was an agreement between several powerful factions that wanted to control the galaxy's most valuable resources. Samuel was the one who broke the deal. He took something that wasn't his, something that could give anyone who controls it unimaginable power. Jake's mind raced. "So what's that got to do with us?" "They want it back," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And they'll stop at nothing to get it. The people after me, the people after you. They won't rest until they have what Samuel stole." Jake's grip on the papers tightened. This was bigger than just her late husband's secrets. This was about power, control, and survival. And now, Jake was in the middle of it all. Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Eleanor stiffened, her eyes widening with fear. Jake quickly stuffed the papers into his coat pocket and grabbed her arm. "Get to the back room," he whispered urgently. "Now!" Eleanor hesitated, but followed him as he pulled her through a door and into a small, hidden room behind the study. They crouched low, holding their breath, listening. Footsteps grew louder, and Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Someone was coming. As the door creaked open, Eleanor's hand gripped his. "Who is it?" she whispered. Jake couldn't answer. All he knew was that the danger was closing in fast. Whoever was after them was getting closer, and the secrets they had uncovered were about to cost them everything. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Jake and Eleanor ventured into the depths of the mansion. The night before had been a strange mix of unease and tension, but now the reality of their situation was beginning to hit Jake harder than ever. Eleanor's late husband, Samuel, was not just another wealthy man. He had been part of something much bigger, something dangerous, and now Jake was in the middle of it. Eleanor, normally so poised and controlled, looked shaken this morning. The elegant widow who had played the part of the grieving woman the night before now seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. Jake couldn't help but feel sympathy for her, even if he didn't fully understand why she had asked him to pretend to be her husband. "We need to get to the study," Eleanor said quietly, pulling him from his thoughts. Her voice was firm, but Jake could hear the tension underlying her words. That's where it all started. Jake followed her down the long hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The air smelled of dust and aged wood, a sharp contrast to the polished opulence that surrounded them. Every room felt as though it was hiding something, each step bringing them closer to a truth neither of them was prepared for. Eleanor stopped in front of a door, her hand resting on the handle. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze distant. "This is where he kept everything," she whispered, as if speaking louder might disturb the silence that had taken over the mansion. "I'm afraid of what we'll find." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He didn't know what Eleanor had been involved in with her late husband, but it was clear it was something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. He had been hired as a simple mercenary, but now his role had grown far more complicated. They entered the study. The room was large, with high shelves filled with books and papers. A large desk sat in the center, covered with old documents, but nothing that seemed to stand out. The place looked like any other study, a sanctuary of knowledge, but the air in here felt heavier, more oppressive. Eleanor walked toward the desk, her hands trembling as she opened the drawers, rifling through the papers inside. Jake stood by the door, scanning the room with a sharp eye. He could sense something was off. The way Eleanor's fingers moved quickly but carefully through the papers told him that she was looking for something specific, something hidden in plain sight. "Anything?" Jake asked, his voice low. Eleanor didn't answer at first. She was focused on the desk, flipping through stacks of paper. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she stopped. Her hand rested on a large folder, thick with documents. She pulled it out and opened it carefully, as if afraid of damaging the contents. Jake watched her closely, wondering what they were about to uncover. Eleanor's face grew pale as she read the first page. She didn't speak for a long moment, but Jake could see the fear growing in her eyes. Something about this document was different. She looked up at him, her face tight with worry. "This is it," she said finally, her voice shaking. "This is what they're after. The Blackstone Protocol." Jake frowned. "What is it? And why are they looking for it?" Eleanor swallowed hard. The Blackstone Protocol was a secret agreement between several powerful factions. They were trying to control access to certain resources. Dangerous ones. Samuel was involved in it. He was supposed to deliver certain things, but instead, he took something. He didn't just steal it, he hid it. Jake crossed the room and stood beside her, his eyes scanning the document. The words were dense, filled with legal jargon and codes he didn't understand, but he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Whoever was after them didn't just want Samuel's wealth. They wanted control over something far more valuable, something that could change everything. "So what now?" Jake asked. Eleanor closed the folder slowly, her mind racing. "Now we find out what Samuel hid and get it before they do." Jake nodded. "And how do we do that?" Eleanor hesitated, biting her lip. "I'm not sure, but there has to be a clue here, something that tells us where it is." She returned to the papers, flipping through them again. Jake stood beside her, glancing around the room. Something didn't feel right. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the sense that they weren't alone. Then, as if answering his unspoken fears, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Jake's body tensed. His hand instinctively reached for the gun at his side, but he stopped himself. He wasn't sure if he could trust Eleanor yet, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let anyone find them in here. "Get down," he whispered urgently. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She quickly crouched behind the desk, pulling herself out of sight. Jake followed her lead, hiding behind a large bookshelf that offered some cover. The footsteps grew louder, and he heard the faint sound of a door creaking open. A man's voice called out, "Eleanor, are you in here?" Jake's heart raced as he recognized the voice. It was Lucius, the man from the ball, the one who had been so interested in Eleanor the night before. The man who had seemed so harmless but now felt like a threat. Jake could hear him moving closer to the desk. Eleanor's eyes widened, panic evident on her face. She gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. Lucius had no idea they were in here, but Jake wasn't sure how long that would last. He held his breath, waiting, praying that Lucius wouldn't find them. The sound of footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, until they stopped right in front of the desk. For a moment, Jake thought he had been caught, but then, to his surprise, Lucius spoke again. "If you're here, I know you found it," Lucius said, his voice colder now. "You can't hide it forever." The words sent a shiver down Jake's spine. Lucius knew something was wrong. He knew they were looking for something. But what?
And why was he so sure? Eleanor's face was pale, but she didn't speak.
She held herself perfectly still, barely even breathing. Jake could see the tension in her body as she waited for Lucius to leave. After a long pause, Lucius muttered something under his breath and turned away. Jake didn't move until the sound of retreating footsteps confirmed that Lucius had left the room. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "What was that about?" he asked quietly, turning to Eleanor. She shook her head, still visibly shaken. "I don't know. But he's not the only one searching for it. There's someone else, someone much worse. And if they find us first..." Her voice trailed off. The air inside the mansion had grown heavier. With every passing hour, the tension between Jake and Eleanor grew thicker, as though the walls themselves were closing in. They were running out of time. Jake could feel the weight of the secrets they had uncovered pressing down on them. But there was no turning back now. They had to move fast if they wanted to get to the Blackstone Protocol before anyone else. The afternoon had already faded into evening when Eleanor finally led him to the basement. The narrow, dimly lit hallway seemed endless, with shadows creeping along the walls. The further they descended, the more Jake felt the air grow cold and damp, as though they were entering a forgotten part of the mansion, one that had been sealed away for a long time. Eleanor had said she thought Samuel had hidden something down here, but Jake hadn't expected this. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice quiet as they reached the bottom of the stairs. His hand rested on the gun at his side instinctively, just in case. Eleanor turned to him, her face a mix of determination and fear. "I'm sure. Samuel never trusted anyone. If he hid it, this is where he would have done it." Jake nodded, but deep down, a small voice told him that things were only about to get worse. They walked into the basement, which looked more like an old storage room. Boxes and crates lined the shelves, and the smell of dust and decay filled the air, but it wasn't the clutter that caught Jake's attention. It was the strange markings on the floor. There, at the center of the room, was a large circular symbol, carved deep into the stone. It looked old, ancient even. What's this?" Jake asked, crouching down to inspect it. The symbol was unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked like a mixture of letters and drawings, but none of it made sense. Eleanor's eyes widened as she stepped forward. This is part of the Blackstone Protocol. It's the key to everything." Jake stood up, his brow furrowing. "The key? To what?" "To the location of what Samuel hid. This symbol, these markings, they lead to it," Eleanor said. "Samuel thought that by hiding it here, no one would ever find it. But the people after us, they know what this is. They've been looking for it for a long time." Jake didn't need to ask who they were. He already knew. The group of dangerous individuals who had been after Eleanor, and now after him, were close. If they hadn't already arrived, they would soon. The thought of being trapped in this basement, with no way out, made Jake's stomach turn. "We need to move fast," Jake said, his voice firm. "If they find us down here, we're done for." Eleanor nodded, moving toward one of the crates against the wall. She grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. Inside there were a few scattered papers, but nothing that looked particularly valuable. "There has to be something here," she murmured to herself, rummaging through the papers. "Something that'll lead us to it." Jake watched her for a moment, then turned his attention back to the symbol on the floor. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the key to everything. But how could they unlock it? What was the connection between the markings and what Samuel had hidden? He bent down again, studying the symbol more closely. As he traced the edges with his fingers, he noticed something odd. The edges of the circle seemed to be connected by a thin, almost invisible thread. It wasn't just a random design. It was a puzzle. And Jake had a feeling he was the one who was meant to solve it. Eleanor must have seen the realization on his face because she stopped searching through the papers and walked over to him.
"What is it?"
she asked. I think this symbol is a lock," Jake said slowly. "It's hiding something, but we need to figure out how to unlock it." Eleanor's eyes widened. "A lock?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, look at these marks. There are patterns in them, like a code. If we can figure it out, it might open up a hidden compartment or doorway." Eleanor looked uncertain but nodded anyway. "Let's do it." Together, they bent down to examine the symbol more closely. It took several minutes of careful inspection, but eventually Jake's fingers brushed against one of the markings, and it shifted slightly. Eleanor gasped. "That's it," she exclaimed. "It moved! You did it!" Jake felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. The ground beneath them rumbled as the symbol began to glow faintly, the edges lighting up with a soft blue light. Then, with a loud click, the floor shifted. A hidden trapdoor slowly creaked open in front of them. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "It's here," she whispered, barely able to speak. "This is it." Jake stood back, motioning for her to go first. "After you." Eleanor hesitated, but then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward, descending into the darkness below. Jake followed closely behind her, keeping his gun ready just in case. The stairs led them into a small, dimly lit room. It looked like a storage chamber, filled with old crates and piles of papers. But there, in the corner of the room, was a large metal chest. The chest was old, but it had a strong, intricate lock on it. Jake approached cautiously, studying the chest. "This is it," he muttered. "This is what they were after." Eleanor stood next to him, trembling. "We need to open it," she whispered, "before they get here." Jake took a deep breath and moved toward the chest. He checked the lock, examining it closely. There was no keyhole, just a strange set of symbols etched into the metal, the same symbols that had appeared on the floor upstairs. "It's another puzzle," Jake said, frowning. "But I think I know how to open it." Eleanor stepped back, giving him space. Jake began to carefully manipulate the symbols, pressing certain ones in a specific order. As his fingers worked, the chest slowly began to click and shift, as though the lock was unlocking itself. Finally, with a final click, the lock gave way. Jake lifted the lid, revealing the contents inside. There, in the chest, lay a small, ancient-looking device, something that looked like a data pad, but it was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was covered in strange symbols and glowing with a soft, pulsating light. Eleanor gasped. "That's it. That's what they've been looking for." Jake carefully picked up the device. It's not over yet, he said, his voice low. We've got what they want. Now we just need to survive long enough to keep it. Just as he spoke, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. The enemies were getting closer. We need to get out of here, Jake said urgently. Eleanor nodded. Fast. As the footsteps grew louder, they turned and fled the room. But the final stand had only just begun. They had what they came for, but now they had to stay alive long enough to use it. The chase had only just begun. Let me know if you'd like any change. Jake knew what she meant. If they didn't act fast, everything they had just uncovered would be lost, and they would be caught in the middle of something much bigger than they had ever imagined.